Whether you're looking for answers to specific life questions or seeking to become the best version of you possible, welcome to the Mental Breakdown and Psychreg podcast, where we offer insight, information, and strategies based upon research and years of practice as clinical psychologists. So sit back, have a listen, and get connected with our hosts, Dr. Berney Wilkinson and Dr. Richard Marshall. Welcome back. Richard, we're going to do a movie review today, and it's different this time because we're not recording it live. We're not doing the live YouTube event because of all kinds of changes to our schedule and all kinds of things that we had to shift around.
Irma continues to dictate our schedules.
Yes, during the time slot that we were going to do the live video YouTube event for A Monster Calls, we had to, or wanted to, or needed to, or are excited that we had the opportunity to interview someone that's going to be posted later on this week. So we're recording this movie review on our own. We don't have feedback from listeners, so it'll be a little bit different, but that's okay.
So we missed the live audience.
That's right.
Right.
We're okay with different.
But hopefully people will tune in and give us their comments on this wonderful story.
That's right. So the movie that we're going to talk about today is A Monster Calls. Now, two things to disclose. First, we chose this movie without either of us ever having seen it.
Right.
So, there you go. That's the big disclosure.
That's right, because I thought you had seen it. And I said, well, when did you? And he said, I've never watched it before. And I said, well, I wondered how it was chosen. How was it chosen?
My wife had seen it.
Oh, that's
she
right.
said it was really
That's
good.
right.
And so then I did some reading about it, and it was, I was like, wow, that's a really interesting story. And so, so that's why
right.
I proposed it. And then we both watched the trailer, and we were like, okay, let's do it.
Yeah, I forgot that she had seen it. Right.
Yeah.
Good recommendation. Yeah.
It was. And so this movie is I am surprised because it's very well done. It's the CGI is really good. The story is fantastic. We'll get to the acting in a few minutes, but it was fantastic. It came out in December of 2016, and I had never heard it. I had never heard of it.
I had never heard of this movie. December 26th. That's movie time. Mm-hmm. We all go to movies over Christmas. I assume it was in theaters. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it even came out like right around Christmas time, December 23rd or something.
And
like that.
it should have been one of those things that when you were saying it's a movie, and I thought it's a blockbuster. Yeah. It should have been somebody should have won an award. Yeah. Or several awards for this movie.
Now there were some awards won, but I think what really disappoints me is that I have IMDB pulled up right here because I want to.
You have what?
IMDB. It's okay. Don't worry.
IMDB.
Internet Movie Database. Now, if we
wait
look
a minute.
Oh gosh.
IMDB.
Internet Movie DB database. Internet Movie Database.
And it's
a website that has everything about almost every movie ever made and to be created.
How long has that been out? IMDB.
A long time. It's okay. It's all right. But one of the important things that's on here is it has the box office totals. The budget for this film was estimated to be $43 million. Now, I think much of that is the CGI, special effects.
CGI.
But also computer-generated images. It's okay. And of course, because there's a few big stars in it. But look at the gross.
That's unbelievable. The opening weekend.
It only made $30,000 the opening weekend.
Something's
December
wrong.
23rd.
Something is wrong here.
So it's what's sad to me about it is that I don't know what the current gross is. The gross as of the end of January was 3 million something, but it doesn't show anything more. It did much better worldwide. So worldwide, it's probably come close to. It has certainly made its money back. But what I'm getting to is here in the United States, at least, it has not gained any notoriety. It has not, been publicized. Again, I don't even remember how my wife came across it, but we came across this film, and we both had it on our list to watch, and she watched it before I had a chance to.
I think I would refer to this as a pearl.
Yeah.
It's in an ugly container, but there is an absolute gem inside.
Right.
I think everybody should see this at least once.
Yeah. There's moments that are a little intense, especially when the monster first comes, but it's fantastic. We'll get to that in just a minute. It's directed by J.A. Bayona, something like that. Mm-hmm. But it's written by Patrick Ness. And Patrick Ness wrote the book as well as the screenplay, so this is his baby, you know. But there's 4 actors.
4 main characters. It really revolves around these 4 people.
Right. The first character is Conor, C-O-N-O-R, which is very close to how we spell my Conor's
That's
name.
probably why your wife watched it.
He spelled his name K-O-N-O-R.
Right.
So, and that's played by Lewis McDougall. That kid, he acted his socks off. He did such a great job. Unbelievable. His grandmother was played by Sigourney Weaver, who we all know
Say
is
no more.
fantastic.
Right.
His mother was Felicity Jones,
right.
and again, fantastic actress. And the monster was voiced by Liam Neeson, who just has a monstrous voice. He does so well. That Scottish hint in his accent with the deep gravelly, it was fantastic. But all of these characters and actors came together, and if I was a film critic, like you said, I would say this is something that everybody needs to see. It's rated PG-13. I don't even think that there was a curse word in it, not that I can remember.
No.
There wasn't any. The violence was 2 kids fighting, but nothing.
But it wasn't graphic, right?
Nothing graphic.
I mean, you knew it was a struggle. You
right.
knew it was difficult, but it wasn't graphic.
The most graphic thing was the mother's illness, and we learned this right away, early in the film. And so I guess we probably should start doing this at the beginning of times when we are reviewing movies. There's going to be spoilers here. We're going to talk about the film in some specificity. So if you haven't seen it yet, you might want to pause and come back to this after you've watched it. But but we are going to talk about some things pretty specifically.
Right.
But even if you watch the trailer or read the synopsis, we know very early on that he lives alone with his mother, and his mother's sick from cancer.
Yeah, one of the first things you realize is that he's alone in the morning. He's getting ready for school or something. Right. So and he's doing it by himself. So
he's doing his laundry.
Right. So you say, why is this kid? And he's about 11 or 12 or 13 or something. He's in that trend. He's a tweener. He's a small. Yeah, 12. Small kid, diminutive. And so he's doing all this stuff. So, okay, where are the adults? Then he opens a cabinet, and there's a medicine bottle in there.
Yeah. And
if you look it up, if you don't know what the medicine is, you look it up and you know right away why there are no adults around, or at least why somebody's not around for some reason.
Yeah. So his mother is fighting cancer, and she's going through various forms of treatment, chemotherapy and different things throughout the film. But yeah, he is taking care of himself. So he gets himself up in the morning. He does his laundry. He fixes his breakfast, and he gets to school and doing
little disheveled. His tie isn't where it should be, and his jacket's he's kind of
he doesn't button his top button,
which is a good thing. But he's kind of I can't think of the word, frumpy, kind of sloppy. His pants are too long and his shoes are dirt. He's disheveled. He's a little disheveled. He looks throughout the entire movie. He's a little disheveled.
Yeah, and you can tell he feels alone. He feels invisible, and that's going to be something
he's alone.
We speak to in more detail later.
And the other thing that comes out very early is there's something about him drawing.
Yes,
and that becomes another major theme besides being alone. You see this. It's a wonderful thing that they did with the film, because they show the pencil going across the paper at very close range, and you see him. Obviously, he's drawing something. You don't know what it is yet, but he's drawing something. Yeah. So his drawing becomes a theme in the movie. Right, remains a theme.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we go through the film, instead of going through it really sequentially, there's some really specific highlights that we want to pull out and talk about. But the movie does start out with Conor asking the question. You just sort of hear the voiceover. How does the story begin? And you hear that.
You hear a voice.
The unmistakably Liam Neeson voice. He says, it begins like so many stories, with a boy too old to be a kid, too young to be a man, and a nightmare.
Right.
And this is just as Conor's waking up from a nightmare.
Right. And he was having he has this recurring nightmare, obviously losing his mother. And you're right. And so immediately you know that we're talking about somebody who's just beginning the transition.
Right.
That adolescent transition. So this is a boy entering adolescence and transitioning to adulthood.
Right. And
the struggles that one has at that age.
And so, again, so well written to pull up the details that this is the life of a 12-year-old. Right. That in between, too old to be a kid. He's not a kid anymore, but he's not a man. So he's too old to sort of get away with the childish behaviors, but too young still to really know how to behave like an adult.
He doesn't know what to do with the emotions he's feeling. Yeah. They're big emotions because our emotions are big in those years. One of the magical things about this movie is how the adult, whoever captured the struggles that we go through during these years, did a really good job, because we forget, and I mentioned this in our book one time. As adults, we know how everything turns out. So we look back and say, hey, it's going to be okay. It's going to be all right. Everything works out okay. But man, when you're looking in the other direction, you're saying, I don't know how this is turning. I don't know where this is going. Yeah. You feel like you're on a train with no brakes headed downhill. Yeah. This kid's looking into his future, not knowing what in the world is going to happen, or when it's going to happen, or how it's going to work out. So it's really a scary time. Yeah. So you understand the nightmares because he's scared to death. Yeah. He doesn't know how it's going to work out.
Absolutely. And well, we'll kind of get to some of the scary stuff in just a little bit. And scary stuff meaning scary about decisions that you have to make, and what's going to happen. So we know that he's in this in-between stage, and I think that part of that, and what the monster is there to help him, right? The monster is there to help him.
Early on that the monster is not an adversary.
Right. Now, the arrival of the monster is a little intense. Right. And again, it's PG-13, so
nobody gets hurt.
7 or 8 year olds probably shouldn't be watching it necessarily, but
true.
But it's a little intense, and there's times when the monster gets angry and he turns red and fiery a little bit. But again, it's not. You never get the sense that he's in danger, and I think that's not something that I pulled out on the slides here, but. Conor's a courageous kid. Mm-hmm. When he first encounters the monster, he just walks right up to him.
That surprised me. Yeah. He did. He walked right up to this thing.
And it's the monster comes from this huge yew tree. Mm-hmm. And so he's a big wooden with limbs coming off in different directions, looking like spikes and stuff.
He emerges from the tree, and brings part of the tree with him. So the front, he's got all these tentacles and things coming out the back of his head and his shoulders and things. But you're right. So it would be scary to young children. But Conor just walks right up to it. Yeah, and it's more out of curiosity. He's also a curious kid,
right? When he gets angry with it,
right? And he fights back, which is good. But
and so the monster arrives at 12:07.
Yes,
12:07 a.m. And we find out. We'll talk later why that time is important. But so 12:07, and the monster is there to help Conor through this process, and he says, I'm going to tell you 3 stories, and then at the end there'll be a 4th story, but that will be the story that you tell. Right. And so Conor's a little bit resistant, but he tells these stories, and they're 3 sort of very complex, abstract stories. The first story is about a prince or a king,
the king,
who has a beloved kingdom, and his wife passes, and he takes a new queen, and his son is, and they talk about all the things that he had to sacrifice for his kingdom to be happy and healthy, and his sons actually had to go fight and died, and so he was raising his grandson as the heir. He takes this new wife, and she is a witch, is what we find out.
Right.
And so the story goes on, and it ends up to where all kinds of it's just fascinating. I don't want to tell the whole story because I want everybody to listen to it, but it's a very complex story, and it ends in unexpected ways, and the monster talks about things. And so Conor says at one point in the movie, he says, "Your stories never make sense to me." And the monster responds with, "Because humans are complicated beasts. Right. You believe comforting lies while knowing full well the painful truth that makes those lies necessary. In the end, Conor, it is not important what you think. It is only important what you do." Mm-hmm. And then Conor asks, "So what do I do?" And the monster says, "What you did just now. You speak the truth."
Right.
Conor says, "That's all?" And the monster says, "You think that's easy? You were willing to die rather than speak it."
Right.
And I think that this sequence, this portion of the film is so wonderful. And again, it's well written, because we talk to our kids sometimes about very complex issues, morality, ethics. We talk, you make this decision over this decision, and kids go from being very black and white, yes and no, right and wrong, to a world that is much more gray, to a world that has many more. One of the stories is the prince. In that story that I was telling, the prince, he was going to take a bride, and the bride ended up dying, being killed, and everybody blamed the queen, and so they got rid of the queen, and then they thought the queen was this evil person because they thought that she had killed the king so that she could take power and all this kind of stuff. And in the end, none of that was true. Right. The queen had not killed the king. The queen didn't kill the girl that the prince wanted, and in fact, the prince had killed her because he knew that would be a way to turn the people against the queen, so to get her out so that he could take over. But in the end, he was a beloved king. That evil queen, the witch queen, she went off somewhere else and lived somewhere else. And everybody seemed to come out okay. Right. And so it's really confusing for a child to appreciate how can these things happen at the same time? How can a person make a really bad decision but be a relatively good person?
Right. Because he asks, where are the good guy? Who's the good guy?
Right.
And the monster says,
"It's not always a good guy."
Not always a good guy.
And there's not
Humans
always a bad
are
guy.
complicated. We have a little, and this is part of the adolescent transition, is that you go from there's good and evil to everybody has a little bit of good and a little bit of evil. And you learn that as a teenager, or you should learn that as a teenager. When you're a young child, you don't realize that somebody can be good and bad at the same time. That good people can do bad things and bad people can do good things. You learn that as a teenager, and that's the lesson that he begins to learn, that Conor begins to learn from the monster's stories and actions.
Right. And I think that where this plays out in many people's true life is with divorce.
Right. We see it all the time with children of divorce.
Because you have the parents who are now opposed to each other. Right. And the kid is being told that the mother or father is bad by the other parent, but the kid sort of at the same time says, "Well, that's mom," or "That's my dad." They're good people, and so it's really conflicting for kids, and they really have a difficult time appreciating that. And so here, I think it is very developmentally appropriate for Conor to be struggling with that, because he is just at that age where he would be transitioning to appreciate it.
Yeah, because these children of divorce, the preteens, they don't realize that there are two stories. Right. As adults, we realize that mom has a story and dad has a story, and they each have a true story. Children don't operate that way. Right. Theory of mind tells us that a child will look for the truth. And so they keep struggling with their parents, thinking, well, if Dad, somebody has to be lying.
Right.
I'm getting two stories,
Mm-hmm.
so somebody has to be lying. And so they spend a lot of time and energy trying to figure out who's lying.
Right.
When nobody's lying. They're each telling their truth.
Right.
But when you're 8 years old, you can't grapple with
right.
that incongruity. And so kids struggle in those years. And parents are, and that's why we advise parents, don't tell your story
right.
because they don't understand that there are two stories here. They just can't grapple with that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Conor's just beginning to grapple
right.
with it. He's really, and he gets angry because he said, wait a minute, I want the truth. I want to know. I want to plant my flag somewhere.
Right.
And the monster's saying, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. I saw this in another, not in another film, but in a person's report from war. And they were talking about how, we grow up thinking that we go to war against another group of people and they are the bad guy.
We demonize
and
them.
So, so they have to be bad, and that's how we have to focus on them so that we can go to, battle against them. And there was a soldier who came back, or infantryman, I can't remember his exact role, but he came back and he talked about, going across the battlefield. And so this was World War II, I think. And he went basically into a foxhole, and there was a soldier from the other side there holding a Bible, praying. And it really, he said that he talked about how that really shook him because he was holding the same Bible that he held before he went into battle that day. He was praying a very similar prayer, just in a different language than what he would pray, and he that really affected him to the point where he really had a difficult time continuing to fight. And certainly that person is much older than Conor, but that incongruity continues to be the case. We try to think that, okay, it's black and white, it's good and bad. In reality, life is much more complex than that.
Right.
Humans are complicated beasts, as the monster says.
Right. The monster's right. They're complicated beasts.
That's right. So as we go through the film, we see, the monster comes in the evenings or at night around 12:07, and one time during the day at 12:07. We'll talk about that in just a second. But he's there at 12:07 and tells the story or kind of shares some information. But the rest of the movie, of course, is Conor's life. Right. And what we see is we see him at school. We see him sitting in the back of the room, not really paying attention, drawing a lot. We see him listening to headphones at school.
Right.
We see him walking down the streets by himself. I mean, terrific images of just this 12-year-old boy walking down the road. Nobody else on the road. Nobody
else is around. No cars, no people, no dogs, nothing.
And that's a striking thing throughout this entire movie, is that, there are relatively few actors and actresses in the movie, except for those individuals. The only place that we actually see more people is in the classroom.
At school.
Right. Otherwise, the streets are almost always empty.
Right.
And there's not much else going on. So you get this real feeling of Conor's loneliness, and it does turn into, and it's very explicitly said, that he is invisible.
Right.
And so, one of the things that happens during development is, during this time, kids feel invisible.
Right.
During this stage, we have this the adolescent fable, and we have these different things that kids are going through, or teenagers, tweens are going through, as they're trying to figure out where they fit in, and they feel like they're the only ones that are going through this. They feel like nobody else understands. They have this. They build this fable that they are isolated, that nobody else can understand them. Except for maybe a friend, but otherwise nobody else can understand them, and they're all alone. Now Conor didn't have any friends,
right? No,
and we see that very clearly.
Nope.
And so, a couple of things that really stood out to me was, at one point they're getting ready to take a test in school, And Conor is sitting there with his little MP3 player with the headphones on. Like, not even like earbuds, but like big headphones.
Big headphones, right.
And the teacher walks by, puts the paper on his desk, and just keeps walking and talks about, you know, there's no cheating, you know, when you finish the test. Like, the teacher didn't even recognize that he's sitting there with headphones on and not really even paying attention or anything.
Right.
It was striking. And earlier...
And he even looks at him. Conor at one point looks up at the teacher and like...
you're not going to say anything?
Do you see there's somebody sitting in the desk with headphones on?
Exactly.
And no, nobody says anything. And he just said, okay.
Earlier in the film, Conor was sitting back in the back of the room, and the teacher came back and kind of whispered, are you doing okay? You know, if you ever want to talk. Right. And Conor's like, I'm fine, you know. So we get that idea that the school knows that he's struggling with these issues. Mm-hmm. But because he's struggling with these issues, they ignore him.
Right.
Completely.
They're afraid to, I think they all look like they're afraid to intrude into his struggle. Mm-hmm. You know, they don't know what to do, so they do nothing.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Which is an error of omission.
Almost as bad as doing the wrong thing.
As it turns out, you know.
Yeah, so this culminates in... So there's a bully. And I wish I understood... I'm going to have to read the book because I want to fully understand the dynamics of the bully. Because he picks on him for... you know, not that bullies need a reason to pick on anybody, but there's no reason.
There's two things about this bully. One is you never really know why they're picking on him. You know, it's
he just looks back at him and, you know... And then leaves him a note, you know, I'll see you as usual after school.
Right. Oh, that was terrifying.
Oh. He opens his math book and those little note inside.
And the bully is that. Do you remember that story, the Christmas story about the BB gun?
Yeah.
I've forgotten the name of it.
It's called A Christmas Story.
Is that what it's called?
That's okay.
Okay. Well, there's a couple of Christmas stories, but the bully in that is unlikable. You just don't like him because of the way he looks. You don't dislike this bully. He's a good-looking kid.
Yeah.
And you realize he's a bully, and he's not terribly physical. I mean, physical enough, but number one, you don't know why he's picking on him, and number two, you don't really dislike the bully.
Well, and you know what was really interesting is
you hate what he's doing.
The one of the last times that he beats him up, he always has these two cronies that are with him.
And you don't like them.
You don't like them. Because it's like Crabbe and Goyle from Harry Potter. You know, it's like you don't like those guys. But at one point, one of those other two hit him. And he goes, no. Mm-hmm. You know, O'Malley and I, we have an understanding. I'm the only one that touches him.
Right. And
it's like... It's almost sibling-ish.
Right. It's almost like a sibling rivalry.
Yeah.
You know? Like they have some history that we don't know about.
Right. Mm-hmm. So at one point, again, this culminates in a scene in the cafeteria at school, right at 12:07 in the afternoon. And the bully comes up to Conor at school, and he confronts him, and he says, I think I finally figured you out.
And you think, oh, finally we're going to figure this. We're going to finally find out.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was truly thinking that at some point, the bully was going to switch and sort of embrace him but no, that didn't happen. No. And he says, you know, from now on, you know, I'm not going to bother you anymore. I'm not going to mess with you anymore because from now on you're invisible to me. You aren't even here. And he turns to walk away, and as he's walking away, he makes the error of saying, I hope your mom's okay. Mm-hmm. And at that time, it struck 12:07.
Right.
The monster comes, and the monster says it's time for the third story. And the third story is about a boy who's gets really mad, an invisible man, who was tired of being invisible, and so Conor and the monster, and we later learn, of course, that it's just Conor, runs after this kid, catches him from behind, and sends him to the hospital. Right. It reminded me of the scene from Perks of Being a Wallflower that we talked about last time. Mm-hmm. If you touch my friends again, I'll blind you.
No,
but
that was from
Perks of Being a Wallflower. Yeah. So
but there was a similar scene in 13 Reasons Why.
Yeah.
How finally you get this rebellion, get even. But you don't realize, because you don't see the violence.
Right.
Okay? Once again, you don't see it.
You see the flashbacks of a few hits, but that's about it.
Right.
Yeah.
But you don't realize what he did until he's sitting in the principal's office and she said, "You put him in the hospital."
Yeah.
And you say, "Oh my gosh." So it's
little kid.
the stunning change in him. But yeah, he goes from being bullied, one form of attention, and to you're invisible. Yeah. And then you say, which is worse?
Right.
Is it worse to be because at least you exist if somebody's picking on you? To say you're invisible puts you in a very different category.
Right.
And I don't know which is worse. Sometimes we say, I'd rather that they hate me rather than be indifferent to me.
Right.
Dislike me, but don't be indifferent.
Right. And and so, as you said, we've next find him in the principal's office, and she talks about him, and she talks about how this is an expulsion, a offense that's worthy of expulsion.
Right. That he could be expelled.
But they're not going to do it.
But they don't.
And they send him back to class.
And he asks about the punishment. You're not going to punish me?
She says, what good will that do?
Right. Which is a recurring theme.
I don't know how to take that.
Well, it's a recurring...
I take it... Well, go ahead.
It's a recurring theme throughout the whole movie.
There's another scene where he and the monster are destroying this... in his... We think it's in his dream. Is destroying this... I think it's a
church.
Chapel. Yeah. Destroying it. And when it comes back to reality, he is destroying a room in his grandmother's house. With
the grandfather clock.
Oh my.
And the significance is, at one point in the movie, she tells him, that's the only clock that tells accurate time. And she refers to the clock on his computer and says, that's not the right time.
Not your computer, not your phone. That's the accurate time.
That's the accurate time. Because it was her mother's clock or something.
And he had been telling the accurate time for hundreds of years.
Right. For our family. And he took
care of that.
The clock was on the floor. He destroyed the furniture, he destroyed the whole room.
And when we talk about how good of an actor this kid is, he looked, the expressions on his face, the emotion that he evoked when he was doing that.
He captured it.
Wow. It was amazing. It was really amazing.
The blind rage.
Right.
Came through.
But and then when he realized that he was really what was really happening, and he looked around the room as Grandma's walking in, the terror, the regret,
the self-awareness, the awareness of what he had just done.
He doesn't even say it, but you can.
He doesn't need to say anything.
But at that point, Grandma did not say anything. She did not punish. She didn't do anything. And in fact, she didn't talk to him again for a good portion of the remainder of the film. And then now the principal didn't punish him. And it's that, again, this recurring theme of, it doesn't matter.
And his dad didn't punish him. There was another scene where his dad said...
and his dad said, well, what good would that do?
They keep it, what good would... All three of them said, what good would that do?
Yeah. And he's looking for that. He's looking for... And we've talked before about how kids want structure. They don't overtly say, I want you to apply structure. I want you to control me. I want you to manage this stuff. But they really do want that. They really do need that.
Right. They need the security of knowing where the boundaries are.
Right.
And if you make the boundaries too big, or you don't have any boundaries, it's very unsettling to children, and including adolescents.
Right. Yeah. So
but this punishment thing. As I watched it, I was glad that they didn't punish him.
I was too.
He didn't need... what would they have done?
Right.
The kid's already struggling with this enormous issue of his mother dying in front of him. And not knowing what his future is going to be like. So, on the one hand, I appreciated that they weren't punishing him. So they sort of understood the struggle that he was going through, and that all of this was a manifestation of his struggle. On the other hand... I'm sure that people will wonder, well, what should the consequence be? When kids do things like this. And
what I kept hoping, and they didn't, and I think that, and I don't think that that's a flaw of the film. I think it's a reality.
It's a reality. Right.
that nobody said, let's talk about how angry you are.
No.
Nobody said, let's talk about this because clearly you're struggling, dude. Let's talk about what's happening. Right. Nobody did that. No. And again, I don't think that that's an omission of the film inadvertently. I think that that's what really happens. We oftentimes deal with kids and tweens and teens who are struggling with these really deep, intense emotions, and nobody says, let's talk about how you're feeling. Right. Let's talk about what's going on with the fact that your parents divorced when you were young and your dad went off to move to the United States.
That was the first issue he was dealing with that you don't realize until later.
Yeah.
That his dad sort of rejected him. And he keeps rejecting him.
And Dad talks about his stepsister.
Right. Yeah.
Or half-sister. Half-sister. Right. And Dad's like, well, maybe you could come for Christmas. And he's like, just for a visit, and Dad's like, well, you can't come to LA because
you can't live with us.
Yeah. And so there's that rejection and his mom's dying, and it's like all of these,
we only have one bed, two bedrooms, so you can't come and live with us. And he's thinking,
and there's one scene attend to this scene where Dad hugs him, or he hugs Dad. He's real sad. And midway through the hug, he pushes Dad away, like both arms fully extended. And, again, it's that insecure attachment. It's the, I want to be close to you, but I can't be close to you.
Right.
And so...
And all it takes is that push away. And we always say teenagers are pulling us toward them with one hand and pushing us away with the other.
Absolutely. There's some other lines from the movie that, again, I think are really good. You mentioned this earlier. There's not always a good guy, not always a bad guy. One of the things that the monster says is many things that are true feel like a cheat.
Right.
And this was in response to something Conor said, and it is so accurate because we hold sort of, again, like the earlier slide said, we hold onto lies knowing that they're lies, but because the truth just feels unfair.
Right.
And it doesn't stop it from being the truth. And so we have to, when we're working with kids, especially, if there's any professionals, mental health professionals listening or watching, you have to think about that when you're working with youth and kids that, especially young kids are going to be looking for black and white.
Right.
Truth and lie. That's what they're looking for.
Right.
And it's not that clean.
No.
So, one of the parts is Conor says, asks his dad, because they were talking about why his parents separated, and Dad says, Dad was talking about it, and Conor says, so you didn't have happily ever after? He goes, Conor, that's not real life. He goes, most of us just get messily ever after.
But you see Conor struggling with this black or white world. That the child's he's finally he's realizing that the absolutes of childhood are beginning to evaporate. The sand is beginning to wash away, and the world is much more. Many things that are true feel like a cheat. There's not always a good guy. There is no happily ever after.
Right, and the next one, love isn't enough.
Right, love is not enough.
It's not enough to carry. It won't carry you through.
Right.
It's this idea that we hold on to they really are fantasies.
We hold on to these fantasies.
They're parts of fairy tales that we learn from when we're young.
That's right. We want them to be true. We want to have a good guy and a bad guy. I was watching a thing the other day, and they were talking about how popular westerns were around. Right before and right after World War II, right after World War I and World War II, because we were looking for good guys and bad guys. We wanted it to be very clear who the good guys were. And so the Western became a very popular story because there was a good guy and a bad guy.
And even if you remember it then, we kept it very clear. Good guys were white hats, bad guys were black hats.
That's right. You could tell the first time you looked at a good guy.
Right.
The bad guys needed to shave and they were dirty and smelly, and the good guy was clean and looked terrific.
Yeah.
Until Clint Eastwood came along.
I was going to say, and then we started to spin that.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm. The whole Star Wars movies, you say, Darth Vader's really a bad guy. But there are things about him.
But, I'm glad that you brought up Star Wars. Because, Han Solo.
Right.
Han Solo, he's a scoundrel. Right?
He's an outlaw.
He's an outlaw. He's
right.
he's a
bounty hunter and an outlaw,
and he does all these things, but he's a good guy.
But he's a good guy underneath all his. But he's a what was he? He was Brett Butler was that in Gone with the Wind. He ran blockades.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he was a smuggler.
Yeah.
He was a smuggler,
mm-hmm.
right? And so
I didn't know that's what you were looking for.
I couldn't remember the word. But Han Solo was a smuggler.
Yeah.
I mean, he was kind of an outlaw, you know, on the edges of the
everybody was
system.
looking for him.
Right. He was. There was a Jabba the Hutt wanted him because there was a bounty on his head.
Yeah.
You know? So you get into these more complicated. Clint Eastwood certainly is a complicated good guy.
Right. Right.
Because he does a little bit of both.
Yeah. Near the end of the film, there's a scene where Connor's going to talk to his mom. Now, throughout the movie, Connor's mom is feeding him false hope. Would that be fair to say?
Well, she's going through these treatments that she hopes will work. I don't think she has much confidence that they will.
But she's telling him.
But she's trying to keep that from him.
Right.
I mean, she knows the truth.
Right.
She's holding it back from him.
Right.
Until the very end.
So near the end, she is clearly not doing well.
Right.
And so he visits her at the hospital, and she has this great little monologue.
Right.
That I think is really beautiful for a lot of reasons. And this is what she says. I'll read it quickly. She says it's okay. She calls him Con.
Right.
She says, "It's okay that you're angry, Con. It really is. I'm pretty angry too, to tell you the truth. But Conor, you listening? One day, if you look back and you feel bad for being so angry you couldn't even speak to me, you have to know that was okay. That I knew, because I know everything you need to tell me without you having to say it out loud. And if you need to break things, by God, you break them. Break them good and hard, and I'll be right there, Con."
Because she just heard.
She found out about them.
Her mother came in and said, he's destroyed the sitting room.
Right.
And she was absolving him of the guilt.
Yeah.
Which was a charitable thing to do.
Right.
At the end of your life. And
I think that it's what I think is so moving about it is that she, as you said, she's absolved, because he's really mad. And he's not talking to her during this point because she just basically told him that the treatment's not working. Right. After telling him that the treatment was going to work and that everything was going to be fine, she's just told him that the treatment's not working,
right.
And she's sorry, and he kind of stopped, and he was clearly distressed. And so she says this, and I think that. So the beautiful thing is first that she recognizes that, and she says it's okay. She's letting him know that don't look back at this and be upset about it. And I really wish that parents did that more often, not just on our deathbeds or anything like that, but there are times when our kids are really ticked off at us, right. And they are not going to talk. They're not going to respond the way that we want them to. They're going to be irritable and agitated. And I think that the ability to say, look, I know you're really upset with me, and that's okay. We'll get through this. It'll be fine. And then we'll, just know that I love you. Know that I understand how and why perhaps that you're angry, and it's going to be okay. We don't do that enough, but I think it's important.
Yeah, I mean, again, we go back to this punishment. There have to be consequences.
Right.
There don't always have to be consequences, but if there are, they should teach something.
Right.
Okay, he destroyed everything in the house, but he was forgiven. Yeah. We understand why you did what you did. I mean, he didn't destroy something every day. This was a single incident. The rest of the time, he was a pretty decent kid, and so I think that's where we have to draw the distinction: is that this is a one-time event. Not a recurring cycle. He's not stealing regularly. He's not cheating regularly. He's not lying regularly. This was a single event. So you forgive. Forgiveness is a little bit easier. It doesn't have to be punished. In fact, he was. His mother's dying. She knows she's not going to be around much longer, and she wants to end on on a good note.
Yeah.
So she does that.
Yeah. So, as I was saying earlier, the film, as we go through the film, the monster says, I have 3 stories to tell, and then you're going to tell your story. And Conor's story is his nightmare. And the nightmare is basically the area around where the yew tree is crumbling, falling into this deep, deep pit. Mm-hmm. And he is there trying to save his mom from falling down in the pit. And he wakes just as their hands release. Right. And so that scene is pretty intense because he's living it and he's experiencing it and all that is happening. And so the monster, and how, again, the way that they edited it and everything, he's holding on and he's, the monster is telling him, say it, talk about it, say what the truth is and everything. And it builds and builds a crescendo, and then it's just complete silence. I thought it paused or something. I was like, what happened? Because it was like complete silence.
Right. And you didn't know whether it was over or what's going to happen next.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, he had let go, and he says, this is where I wake up. Right. And so the monster, as the movie grows, the monster says, here is the end of the tale. And Conor says, I'm afraid. He says, of course you are afraid. It will be hard. It will be more than hard. Mm-hmm. But you will make it through, Conor O'Malley. And Conor asks, you'll stay. And the monster says, I'll be right here. And this is, after that happens, after he works through his story, the nightmare, the culmination of his nightmare is the sad fact that Conor wants it over. Right. He wants to hold on to his mom so much, and he wants to hold on to her, for her to be there. But at the same time, he wants all of this over.
He wants all this to be over.
And he feels awful that he wants it to be over.
Right.
He is torturing himself.
That's the guilt part. Right.
Mm-hmm. And so, the truth that he needed to speak was that he wanted it to be over. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, as Conor's hugging his mom at the end, mom looks at the monster's there. He says, I'll be right here. And so they're back in the hospital by now. And the monster says, I'll be right here. And he's hugging his mom, and his mom looks up and she sees the monster.
And you see recognition in her eyes. Yeah. And at that moment, you know that she and the monster have a relationship. Right. The same kind of relationship that Conor has with the monster. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's really beautifully ties them together. Mm-hmm. And then, the
scene. you have the monster, Conor, his mother, and his grandmother. Right. And all of them are linked at that point. Right. So you know that something special between them.
And I'm pretty sure, I didn't have a way to zoom in and really look at it. But if you watch the film, see if you can, this is what I think I saw.
I know what you're going to say.
This is what I think I saw. There are several times in the movie where you see a picture of his mother as a child, sitting on her father's shoulder. In the picture, I think that's Liam Neeson. I think that Liam Neeson, the voice of the monster, was her father. Right. And so he manifests as sort of this guidance and everything that she needs through him.
Because at one point in the movie, early on in the movie, Conor's mother says, I wished you would have known him. Right. And she was talking about her father. Mm-hmm. Because you do wonder about him. The mother, Sigourney Weaver, is well represented, but where's Dad? What happened to him? Right. And she says, I wished you would have known him. And then at the end, you see these family pictures. Yeah. And one of them is probably, I'll have to go back and look at it.
I think it's him.
I couldn't see it clearly on the one that I was watching. Yeah. But, that would be...
Yeah. But it pulls and ties it all together. And of course, he's hugging his mom, and you get the clear impression as the scene kind of... The picture pans over to the clock and it strikes 12:07. 12:07 is when his mother passes. Right. Mm-hmm. And so that's why that time was so important throughout the film. Right. Yeah. So, but again, just really beautifully done, because it just ties all the pieces together there at the end, things that you didn't know were as significant as they are. Yeah. What this film does well, a lot of things. But one of the
does
things
almost everything well.
One of the things it really does well is I think it does a wonderful job of depicting what life is like for a tween, for a 12-year-old early high school, certainly middle school age child, dealing with some pretty significant life experiences that he has absolutely no control over.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The anger, the sadness, the frustration. You know, he cries several times in the movie,
right. Mm-hmm.
but all of those times are very well contained over specific issues.
And they're tears of impotence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that
because he can't do anything.
He can't control any of this.
Right.
He can't control school. Can't control the bully. Can't control his mother's illness. There's nothing that he has any control
Mm-hmm.
over. And they're tears. You can see their tears of impotence.
Even as the bully is beating him up,
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't cry.
No.
There's no cry. He cries over these things that he has. He cries for a moment over his dad, pushes him away, wipes away the tears, and then just walks away.
Goes on. Right.
He
cries after he destroys the room and he realizes what he's done.
He's very distressed there.
Remorseful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But he's very stoic and very otherwise very flat. After he beats up the bully and he's sitting in the principal's office, there's no tears there.
Mm-mm.
It's just, you're not going to punish me?
Right.
And that's about all he says there.
Right.
So, he has been through so much, and we too often we minimize the things that kids go through, and this film did a really nice job of demonstrating or presenting what it's like for kids to go through some of these things.
Right. As I was watching this, and I thought of the things that he was doing, such as destroying the room,
Mm-hmm.
temper tantrums, beating up that kid.
Right.
Like the principal said, we could have expelled you for
Right.
this. We see kids who do these things.
Mm-hmm.
At no time did we ever dislike Conor.
Right.
In fact, we were always rooting for him.
Right.
We had empathy. Mm-hmm. We understood because we knew the story. We
Mm-hmm.
knew his story.
Right.
And so everything that he did that would have been, he could have been suspended or expelled
Mm-hmm.
for, we were glad that he wasn't because he didn't deserve to be.
Right.
Because we knew his story. We don't know the story
Mm-hmm.
of the children we see, whether we're teachers or
Right.
physicians or psychologists or
Right.
directors of agencies or school administrators. We don't know the story behind the children that we care for.
Right.
And we dislike what they do, and we end up disliking them. You cannot dislike Conor.
Right.
Nobody can dislike this kid.
Right.
Okay? You don't feel sorry for him. You just understand.
Right.
You have empathy, not sympathy.
Right.
And I wished we could get there with the children we deal with this 10 or 20% of children who are belligerent and angry
Right.
and cause so much trouble in schools
Right.
and homes. I wish that we could know their story because I think if we knew their story, their behavior would make more
Right.
sense and we would deal with them very differently.
Yeah.
We wouldn't just punish.
Right. Yeah, I think that's certainly something that we teach and we talk about a lot and we work on a lot here in our practice.
Mm-hmm.
That you have to know the person, you have to know the kid, you have to talk to them, you have to make sure that you create that connection. And we do too often. Parents and adults who work with kids
Right.
see things black and white, even though we're just
Yeah.
talking about how that's a very childlike thing to do. We see things very black and white. Oh no, he's making bad choices. Oh no, he's doing that just to get a rise out of me because
Right.
he knows that he's not supposed to do that or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's really important that we take the time to get to know and look at things from the kids. I say this all the time, but what benefit would it be for him to
Right.
behave that way
Right.
voluntarily?
Right.
What benefit would it be for kids to make these horrible decisions
Mm-hmm.
voluntarily?
Yeah, we have this thing in education called the functional assessment of behavior, functional behavioral assessment, and it's getting reduced to, well, is the child trying to get something or avoid something?
Right.
It's not that simple.
Right.
You know,
There's so many
look
more
at Conor.
things.
It wasn't access or avoid. It's more complicated than that. So if you're going to figure out what the function of the behavior is, you need to know the person's story.
Right.
Okay. Right. And that's what the ACEs study has been telling us, is that there's something else at work here. So make sure you know what it is before you start your interventions.
Yeah. And those of you who are policy developers, here we have a great example of a kid who is experiencing something. He would probably fail his FSA. He would probably fail a state mandated test. Not because he
wouldn't do his homework.
Not because the teacher didn't do a good job.
Right.
Not because he isn't knowledgeable. Not because he's not a smart kid. Not because he doesn't have the skills. But because of life.
Right.
There's so many other things going on
that are more important than how he's doing on a standardized test. I mean, and we have forgotten that. We have lost all of that.
Right.
In this need to generate data, we've lost sight of the fact that there's a story behind each one of these kids, especially the ones who are the most challenging. Yeah. There's something else going on here.
Absolutely.
And it really is incumbent upon us. And I think that's what this movie brought to me, is that there's a story behind each one of these kids.
Right.
We need to know what it is.
Right, absolutely. So, all right.
Doesn't absolve them of responsibility, but it requires a different approach.
Absolutely.
So,
all right. Well, that is all. Great movie.
Yeah.
Please watch it. Please write to us. Let us know what you think. We haven't yet decided what our movie will be next month.
I hope it's as good as this one.
After the talk a minute ago, we might need to be Star Wars. It won't be, because you don't really appreciate Star Wars the way that you should. So
you're right, and I can't finish the word whistle for Star Wars because I just don't know those things about that movie.
I'll help you with that.
I know you probably know those. So yeah, there it is, and I think
it's Greedo.
That's not even a word.
It's Greedo. So, all right. So that is it. We will announce what our next movie will be for October. Right? Oh, maybe it should be a Halloween movie. No, it can't be a.
Well, it could. There are some.
If it was we wouldn't do rated R movies, but I mean we could. But the Rob Zombie Halloween, it's a horror movie, but they depict in that some of the consequences of child abuse in such fantastic ways. But we won't do that one.
Maybe there is a Halloween movie that would be appropriate.
Yeah,
I don't know.
We'll look into that and see what we can find. But all right, that is it though for today.
Okay.
Thanks so much for listening. Write to us if you have any ideas or thoughts about anything about what we said at this or podcast. So until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.